Welcome to Advocates for Truth. I'm Bob Tyler, and here with me is Bailey McDaniel. And also via Zoom, we have Christina Heuser out in Florida, one of our lawyers. Neil Harden is our resident theologian. And we're here today. We want to talk about vaccines. And there's some kind of background issues with regard to vaccines that I think is important and relevant. So what about this now? Now we're one step removed, or maybe a few steps removed, but some of the ability to be able to even have this vaccine to some degree relied upon the fact that there was an abortion in the beginning.
Yeah, and that's kind of where the moral complexity comes in, is acknowledging the fact that we live in a broken and sinful world, and pretty much nearly everything around us, to some extent or other, has been affected by sin. Like if we think about how the sin of slavery in our country's past has been used to build up the infrastructure of our country, even the railroads, and there was slave labor used with that. It's like, it's especially as the distance between our present time and current past sins grows further and further apart, it becomes nearly impossible to completely separate ourselves from the evils of past sins. So it's kind of a balancing, I guess. Like, we want to get as far as we can away from those things, but also realizing that it's impossible to completely separate ourselves altogether. Another example would be like during World War II, the Nazis performed human experimentation. We can, of course, recognize how horrid that was, especially how it was racially motivated. But the results they got, the knowledge they gained from that, the question is, okay, well, can we use that for good now? Or is it so tainted with evil and sin that we should just discard it altogether? And people will come to different conclusions on that. As far as the vaccines are concerned, at least with the Pfizer and the Moderna, nearly every Christian medical ethicist group I've found has said that it's okay to use those. So people are a little bit more divided on the Johnson and Johnson one, because the degree to which the aborted fetal cells are used in that vaccine are a little bit, it's like one step less removed than the other vaccines. So you have to weigh those considerations against the potential good that could come from getting the vaccine and not spreading COVID.
Let me be clear, though. You're not saying that you weigh today saying, okay, well, if we have an abortion, then we have to weigh whether or not whether that's right with regard to the vaccine today. How do I put that? Maybe another way of saying it is, you're not saying that, okay, it's okay for us to have an abortion today if we can use the information that comes from that abortion to create a vaccine. You're not saying that.
Right, I'm not saying that. I'm saying this abortion has already happened, or past evils have already occurred. Does our participation in the science or the knowledge that has come from it either further perpetuate further abortions, or does it create more evils? I think that's probably the main sticking point that we need to wrestle with. And I think because the clear answer is no, because we have these immortal cell lines that just keep producing, they don't require further abortions to happen. They don't require further evil to be perpetuated in order to use these for scientific good. I think personally, I think we are good taking the vaccines, even though they were in a very small part derived, or at least used these immortal cell lines derived from abortions.
What do you think, Bailey?
It seems that it may be comparable to maybe a person who's an organ donor and they're murdered and their organs are used for somebody else's good. Maybe they provide a heart to somebody else, or they provide different life-saving measures. We're in no way condoning that murder. I mean, absolutely, in everything we say that was wrong. But at the same time, we can recognize that it's done, and there's still good that they can provide.
Do you think there's a clear answer in Scripture as to whether or not it's appropriate to take the vaccine?
I don't think that there is. I think it's going to come down to wisdom and to discernment. And I do think the biggest concern that I have is for Christians who go out saying, absolutely everybody needs to take this vaccine, or you should 100% not even consider it if you're a Christian. We really need to allow for that dialogue to be open.
Okay, so my perspective is absolutely persons should have a religious right to be able to come to their own conclusion that the Lord can convict us in different ways. We have often varying convictions, right? Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. And I think that leads many of us to come to different conclusions on these issues. I got a feeling Christina's got a different perspective. What do you think, Christina?
Well, the one thing I do agree with is that everybody has the right to make their own decision. However, my personal faith dictates to me that God designed us perfectly with healthy immune systems. We have everything that we need within us and on this earth to heal ourselves, and, with our faith in Jesus and his healing power. So I don't see, I can't reconcile vaccines with that worldview.
Okay, Christina, what about, let's go back to do you have a problem with the vaccine because it may have the COVID-19 vaccines, because they may have derived originally from some use of aborted fetal cells? Or is it more about just merely not believing that you should put these toxic chemicals, as you said, into your body?
I think that the fact that there are aborted fetal cells used in the manufacture or the development of the vaccines is in and of itself a sufficient basis for objection, but that's not the only basis for objection, certainly not in my personal view. So I have an issue on both counts.
We're gonna address in a future time the ingredients in vaccines. I've often heard, I've had so many anti-vaxxers come to me and say, will you file a lawsuit on our behalf because formaldehyde is in these vaccines and different toxic chemicals. Now, I'll be frank, I have not been able to, I've asked many times for the anti-vaxxers to come to me and give me solid proof. I haven't seen it yet. Now, we're gonna have another session another time where we'll have some experts who really are science experts who can identify what's in these vaccines for us. But taking what you said to be true, let's say even if some of those chemicals are in these vaccines, God gave us doctors, God gave us medical providers, God gave us science. Science is God's science. And so, some would look at that and say, well, to just say, well, I pray and believe and I'm not going to use a medical doctor because that would indicate I don't have faith. I don't think personally, I don't have that theological worldview. But what do you think about that? I mean, it seems to me that, to some degree, some vaccines may be appropriate.
I think certainly there are doctors who are ethical and, perhaps even people within the pharmaceutical industry that are ethical. And certainly at one time, maybe vaccines did have a place, but I think it's naive not to recognize that now those institutions are so corrupt and driven by things other than health, public health. And that's something that really needs to be taken into account. Like, yes, God did give people wisdom and the ability to figure things out from nature. I'm not one of those people, but yes, but at the same time, people are sinful. People are motivated in some cases by greed, by things that are not of God. And all of those things also go into the manufacturing of vaccines and various drugs and things that are sometimes categorized as science. But like I said, I think that all of the things that we need to heal ourselves can be found in nature.
Okay, so Christina, it's important to mention, I don't remember if I mentioned this, but she's one of our lead lawyers, advocates for faith and freedom. And she actually left the state of New York as a result of the mandatory vaccines, right?
Yes, that's right. I have 2 children, and they are partially vaccinated because my view on vaccines sort of evolved over time. But they hadn't received any vaccines, certainly since they were very small, and I will not ever give them another vaccine. And New York did allow for religious exemptions. So that's how they were able to attend school all these years. They're now 17 and 14. And we left New York once the religious exemption was eliminated by the state legislature. So that was about 2 years ago. And we moved to the freedom-loving state of Florida, and we're very happy here.
The free state of Florida.
Yeah.
The Emergency Use Authorization Act is what allows for, theoretically, what allowed for the vaccines to be developed on a fast track for COVID-19. However, there's some problems under the Emergency Use Authorization Act that are some of the arguments that we're going to bring. So can you talk about what arguments we believe will help us to win as it relates to the Emergency Use Authorization Act and the Constitution?
Okay, well, the Emergency Use Authorization Act basically has a caveat that any product that is brought to market pursuant to this statute, basically anybody who it's administered to has to be advised of, firstly, their right to refuse that treatment, and then also of the risks associated with both receiving it and not receiving it, and the potential consequences of receiving and not receiving it. So the argument would be that by requiring it as a condition for going to school, it's a de facto mandate. You're not really allowing for a true choice like the law requires.
All right. So from a constitutional perspective, the issue really comes down to, for example, in public schools, has to do with the California Constitution. I would argue that California Constitution says there's fundamental right to public education, and also protects religious liberty. So our Constitution protects the right to religious liberty, and I think the constitutional argument is effectively that for persons who have a religious objection, or even a conscientious objection, because California Constitution protects rights of conscience, so does our U.S. Constitution. And a right of conscience to many has to do with, no, wait, my conscience will not allow me to introduce this vaccine into my body. It hasn't even been tested long enough. We don't know enough about this thing yet. And so I think that's another argument that we have that we should be able to prevail on, that from a constitutional perspective, you cannot condition a governmental benefit on an unconstitutional requirement.
I agree.
Yeah.
I don't think the school districts are actually mandating the vaccine, though, because there is no vaccine approved for anybody under the age of 16 currently. I have no doubt that they will mandate it when they're able to, but so far that's not the case.
Okay, so the one thing that I think some of us agree on, at least, and I don't know about Neil, I'm interested in hearing from you briefly, and we'll conclude. That is, we should have a right to be able to choose whether or not we get the vaccine first and foremost, right? Are we all on the same page on that?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. How about, should the government be able to tell you that you are not entitled to receive certain benefits or travel certain places or attend school unless you get the vaccine? I think that choice is still a constitutional liberty that we retain into ourselves. I know Christina agrees. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that putting these really harsh limitations on those who choose not to take the vaccine actually limits their ability to follow their conscience, because now they're torn between, say, if you want to travel, you have family overseas, you have convictions where you feel obligated to see your family, but at the same time you feel obligated to respect your decision not to take that vaccine, and now you've come into tension, and it seems a bit of an unnecessary tension to me. So as a government, I would say there's no reason to be mandating these things or putting our citizens in that position.
Neil, how about you?
I think it's complicated, especially when we're talking about public health.
Yeah.
Because there are obviously, if undergoing any kind of medical procedure was, if the results of that was completely on you and it only affected you, I'd say sure, leave it up to individual choice. But because when we're talking about the spread of diseases and how that can affect other people, that if your individual choice causes other people to be in danger from a disease, then I think there's at least some compelling interest for the government to at least say, hey, maybe there's, I just want to say that there's more to it than just individual choice. I do think public health is a genuine ethical concern that we need to balance with that.
And although, Neil, I slightly disagree on the government's interest, I absolutely agree that that this is a decision that for Christians needs to be made with others in mind. And that is one big issue that's been so forgotten in this debate is we tend to focus on what's best for us. But as Christians, we want to consider others' needs as equal with our own.
Okay, but let me throw out one last thing. If I want to get the vaccine to protect myself from COVID-19 because I feel that's going to be beneficial, then I have that right to go protect myself. And everybody has that right. If I don't want to go get the vaccine, I'm hurting myself. Potentially, right? I'm making a decision to take the risk. I mean, whether you're hurting yourself or not, that's not the right way of saying it. But what I'm really saying, I have the right to make that decision. And if anyone's going to be harmed by it, it's only I'm responsible for my own decisions. If you want to get the vaccine, or you want your kids to get the vaccine and you want them to go to school and be quote unquote protected from COVID-19, then you can have your kids go get that vaccine. So they would effectively be protected from me who makes the decision that I don't want to get the vaccine. So I think it comes back to this really ultimately individual choice. We all have the individual right to make our own decision. So from a Christian perspective, I think to me that's a fallacy that is being thrown at us. Love your neighbor. You'll love your neighbor if you go out and you get the vaccine. Well, wait a minute. My neighbor can go get the vaccine themselves and protect themselves from me if I don't feel like it's good for me.
And I am by no means suggesting that that if you care about other people and you value their needs, that you'll get the vaccine. I think my only concern is that our hearts are in the right place, and I think that that's going to lead certain Christians to different practical answers. Some Christians might, with others in mind, get vaccinated, and some Christians might, with others in mind, choose not to, and that's perfectly okay, in my opinion.
Well, thank you. All right, guys. Thanks for being a part of this conversation. We're going to have more, but this is a hot topic right now. We've got litigation coming up to defend the right of parents and individuals to be able to choose for themselves whether or not they're going to get vaccinated. It's interesting from a religious, spiritual, personal perspective. I know Christians come from differing views at times. So thank you all. We'll be back with another session of Advocates for Truth down the road on the subject. Have a good day.